Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers.
You didn't think I was done debunking the Flat Earth, did you? Because I have another Flat Earther who wants to try and disprove gravity.
We are told that mass and the force of gravity are intrinsically linked, comprising the glue which holds together the heliocentric model, allowing everything to stick to the alleged spinning ball Earth.
Simplistic, but mostly correct. Go on.
So let's have a look at that and see whether that is really true. Here I have some cooking oil, an empty jar, normal water, room temperature water, and cold water, which I've just added some colour to.
No, Nick, don't do it, man. That's the Flat Earth kool-aid.
Hey, kool-aid!
Oh, yeah! So you can see here that this oil has a lot of mass. So I'm going to pour this mass of oil into the jar. Okay, and gravity is said to be doing its work, making the oil sink to the bottom of the jar. But if we add some water with less mass than the oil, we'll just put a little bit in and see what happens. Okay, the water sinks to the bottom, even though the oil has a lot more mass than the water. The water has sunk to the bottom and is apparently being pulled down by the gravity more than the more massive amount of oil.
Oh boy, so much to unpack, but I want to let you show your glaring ignorance of the subject matter first before I pick it apart. He is using mass to mean total volume because he's looking at the quantities of water and oil as if they were one object. But if you zoom in here, notice the little bubbles of water in the oil? There is a reason for that. It's because water and oil are liquids, not solids. He's showing us liquid and claiming the water has less mass, but liquid isn't a solid mass, it's a group of particles.
Liquid is the next state of matter. Liquids have a definite volume and mass, but they do not have a definite shape. The atoms in liquid are still close together, but unlike the atoms in a solid, they can move around. This allows the matter in a liquid to flow.
Because liquids are made up of rapidly moving molecules, it can't be viewed as a solid mass. As well, liquids have what's referred to as surface tension. The molecules on the outer edge suffer from an imbalance of forces. While they're attracted to the other molecules within the liquid due to chemical bonds, they are not as strongly attracted to other molecules. This extra pull towards the mass of liquid causes the surface of a liquid to have an almost elastic, tense surface. Now, I don't know what kind of oil he's using, so I'll use canola oil as an example. Canola oil has a density of 0.95 grams per milliliter, while water has a density of 1 gram per milliliter. Water weighs more when comparing two equal amounts of it. In fact, most oils I could look up have less density than water. The more dense the liquid, the more molecules there is within the same volume of that liquid. When you pour water into oil or vice versa, the liquid tries to stay together, but the surfaces of the two liquids collide. The water is denser and has a stronger surface tension. It is able to more easily break up the surface of the oil and part it like a knife. While gravity is pulling both substances down, the water cuts through the oil and sinks to the bottom. The water, as it's pulled downward by gravity, is able to sort of bully past the less dense oil. Because the oil and water both break up into smaller parts, you can't compare the two as if they were one solid mass. But that's exactly what this flat earther is doing. But worse, he understands fluid density. Well, sort of, as he himself explains.
Of course, we have two substances here which are of different densities. Although the oil is thicker, it's less dense than the water. The water is more tightly compact on a molecular level. So this is relative density.
Now, he goes on to add the red water, and I'll show it here without the audio sped up so you can see the result. Because the water is colder and he has a solid substance dissolved into it, the food coloring, it is denser than the warm water. Cooling a liquid, or really any substance, tends to make it more dense. That's why in science class you'll hear about heating things making it expand and cooling things making it contract. There are a few notable exceptions, as for example water when it gets very close to freezing. As it becomes a solid, it forms into a crystalline lattice that actually makes it less dense than normal water by virtue of being a dipolar substance, sort of like a bunch of bar magnets forming into a geometric shape.
This can be explained by the crystalline structure of ice. When water molecules cool down, they vibrate less. As the temperature reaches freezing, these slow-moving molecules latch onto each other at specific points, creating rigid ice crystals with a distinctive lattice shape.
Regardless, he adds a small amount of the red water, once again treats the liquid as one solid mass and goes, "Aha! Gravity isn't real," and then claims this steaming pile of horseshit.
All these things are to do with relative density. And of course, the question that will be asked by people wishing to defend the globe is, what makes up and down in the first place? Well, frankly, nobody really knows, but it is the medium and whatever is put into the medium or adjacent to the medium which makes the difference.
You've been hitting the flat earth kool-aid just a little too hard there, man. So while people show him gravity and explain how it works, and he has an experiment showing it working as intended, he just claims no one knows. No one knows why things are pulled downwards. But density, it's density. But it gets worse. The cringe gets worse.
And there has to be an up and down. But the up and down doesn't mean that we stick to a ball, and it doesn't mean that everything's being pulled to the center of the Earth, as we can see here.
You heard it, there just has to be an up and down. Just has to be. He has no explanation. He believes relative density of materials forces things downward, but can't explain why there is a downward. He doesn't seem to realize the layering he sees from relative density is itself a flawless demonstration of gravity at work. But he didn't just do this video. He's done more on water and density, trying to disprove the idea of gravity. Brace yourself, the weapons-grade stupid is about to go nuclear.
One of the simplest and most obvious observations that absolutely anybody can make anywhere on this Earth, that there is no science whatsoever to back up the claim that we are living on a spinning ball Earth and are stuck to it with gravity, is the fact that water will always flow down a slope or a curve.
What's wrong with you?
So let me get this straight. Gravity isn't real because things are pulled downwards? Did you read your own script before recording this?
The default argument that gravity exists is to observe what happens to liquids in zero-G environments, or freefall. Just like raindrops falling through the sky, this sphere of water, held together with its own surface tension, is said to be proof that water will cling to the outside of a spinning ball Earth.
Whoever told you that is a twit. No, the demonstration of water forming into a rough spheroid in zero gravity, or freefall, is more just evidence that objects will form into balls when lacking outside forces. When water falls at zero G, it holds together by the molecular bonds pulling each other together. A sphere is the most energy-efficient shape these molecules can take, so they will form into a sphere unless acted upon by other forces. Water flows or conforms to a container only because gravity pulls it downwards, and Earth's gravity is stronger than the weaker chemical force holding the water together. What's happening is that all substances, when acted on by outside forces, slowly lose their momentum. As they lose potential energy, they will form into a state that uses the least possible kinetic energy. So like a sphere of water in zero G, water in a glass will flow down to the bottom of the container and settle in such a way as to use the least amount of kinetic energy. This is also why the layering happens. As I explained, the water will knife apart and push aside the oil. Both the water and the oil will lose momentum and start to settle in the most energy-efficient state they can. This is why when you watch other videos of oil and water mixing, you can see bubbles rejoining into one mass of liquid, for example. It's because there's less energy in one mass than having multiple masses with surface tension. The layers you see are the liquids settling into a state of placidity. Flat earthers like to claim this is water finding its level, but in reality the surface is slightly curved to match the surface of the Earth and its relative gravity. It's just that the curve is so minuscule you can't see it with the naked eye.
We are also told that it is the force of gravity pulling everything to the centre of the alleged globe Earth that makes liquids settle in layers on the Earth, and that falling at a rate faster than gravity can keep up will cause the liquids not to form layers, demonstrated here by some university students on a vomit comet. Here we see a density tower with liquid in layers acting as they usually do on the Earth, but when the aircraft goes into freefall, the liquids of different densities that usually keep them separate mix together. But really, these compartmentalized experiments and observations do not fit together in the bigger picture of the heliocentric model of a spherical Earth spinning and falling around a massive sun due to gravity.
You did your own layering experiment in the previous video, trying to use that to claim that there is no gravity, only density. You also lacked an explanation of why there was a down. But now, as these students remove gravity from the equation and are falling in freefall, you notice the layering ends. This should be definitive proof your idea of density is just plain wrong. But not only can't you see it, you can't seemingly state why this demonstration is faulty, only that it simply is.
We are taught to believe that the Earth is a sphere of a specific mass compared to something like the Moon or the Sun, which causes this force of gravity to pull everything down towards the center of the alleged ball Earth at a rate of 9.8 meters per second squared, which is about 195 kilometers an hour or 122 miles per hour. Regardless of the mass of the object being dropped, as demonstrated in vacuum chambers, in which a feather and a heavy ball will fall at the same rate.
Oh, good! You saved me the trouble of showing that same video I keep having to show flat earthers who tell me that gravity doesn't exist. You've seen it! This should be case closed, as there is no material in that room to cause relative density. After all, the layering you see from density is from heavier materials sinking below lighter ones. For density to account for things moving downward, either the heavier material forces the lighter one up, or the lighter one forces the heavier one down. The original video you are referencing, link in the description, demonstrates that the air has been removed as they dropped the feather and bowling ball earlier with air in the room to show how the feathers will float down due to air resistance. Without a medium for these two objects to pass through, density should play zero factor in this demonstration.
However, this constant rate of acceleration straight down for solid objects of a fixed mass that have already been lifted up in the medium of air can be put down to the fact that the air or a vacuum is less dense than anything else, so everything will fall through it at the same rate of speed.
Is this guy for real? Are you a Poe? Let me check his other videos. Nope, he seems to believe this nonsense. Vacuum has no mass. It's empty. There is nothing there. Relative density only functions if there is some form of mass for the materials to pass through. The fact the objects were lifted before the air was removed is irrelevant.
It does not have to have anything to do with the mass of the Earth beneath it. And it has never ever been scientifically proven that down is towards the center of the ball Earth in all directions, rather than just straight down through the medium in which the object is dropped.
Yes it has. That's how we have made objects orbit the Earth. That's how you have GPS satellites. Or are you one of those people who believes everything about our forays in space are some giant international government conspiracy? But yes, we've proven the shape of the Earth as far back as 240 BC when people shoved sticks into the ground and measured the shadows, demonstrating the curve of the Earth at varying points. They even managed to mathematically come close to approximating the Earth's diameter from those measurements. We've since continued to find massive amounts of evidence confirming what we know about the shape of our globe. We've gone to space and landed on the moon. We've sent robots to Mars and satellites to the outer edges of our solar system. Hell, we just tossed a car into space. We have the International Space Station, and for anyone wanting to claim that's fake, I can show you a video that's almost an hour long containing a tour of the station. It has long continuous shots, including one shot from the 1-minute mark to the 28-minute mark. That's continuous, unedited. Link is in the description. The tour goes around corners, the length of the station is exceedingly long, and their weightlessness doesn't suddenly end, and they show you the ins and outs of the station. I am playing part of it here, sped up. The cuts you see are ones I made to highlight certain parts. You can't fake this with zero-G training flights, which could only last for a couple of minutes, especially since the station has corners, which a plane could not. And CG would be nigh impossible for something this long due to the mechanical needs for wires, green screens, and all sorts of props to allow the astronaut to move about as he does fluidly and weightlessly throughout the entire video. I am waiting for the flatards to sit and whine and claim it's a big-budget film with wires and CG. I'd love to see anyone in Hollywood film such a video. Yes, we have lots of evidence for gravity in a ball Earth. I shouldn't have to debunk people like you. I do it because I think my viewers find it entertaining to watch someone clearly demented get schooled on basic science.
2 times x, blah, blah, blah. Not yet.
So, keeping in mind that liquids will not settle in layers of density when they are in free fall at a speed downwards of 195 kilometers an hour or 122 miles per hour. Well, let's compare that with the globe Earth's alleged orbital speed or free fall around the Sun, which is said to be 30 kilometers a second or 108,000 kilometers an hour or 70,000 miles per hour. This assumption, based on calculations made to fit the heliocentric model rather than actual measurements which have never ever been made, would mean that the Earth itself is falling at a rate many times greater than the rate of acceleration downwards required to make liquids not settle. This would logically conclude that if the Earth was in free fall around the Sun, liquids on the Earth would never ever settle.
Nick. Can I call you Nick? I want you to take a look at this part of your own video. Do you see the people in this plane falling at free fall? Do you notice how they can still move about? What about these guys?
Don't know where your eyes are, but they're not doing what you said. Don't know where your mind is, baby, but you're better off without it. Inside down and upside out when you can be Don't stop, can't stop until you feel like going down. I wish I had said the things you thought that I had said.
Notice how they can still do things like kick off the walls and move. They're in free fall, but can still exert force and have force exerted on them, and they can even aim their actions such that they can throw a ball straight despite the fact they're in free fall. The same is true with a globe. Yes, the Earth is in free fall in an orbit around the Sun. That means every object that makes up our globe is all falling at the same rate. We don't feel this speed any more than we feel the speed of an airplane when we're flying in one, but we are traveling at this speed. Because everything's moving at the same relative speed, following the same relative motion, we feel like we're not moving at all. Because we're all falling in free fall at the same rate, everything on Earth would be like these guys in the plane, able to move about freely while in what appears to be zero gravity. And much like the guys on the plane, the Earth can exert force. The Earth exerts gravity, pulling everything in, just like the Sun does. Since it's the strongest force within that free fall, everything nearby is attracted to it. The reason liquids can layer in a jar is, and I know this will be very confusing for you, so bear with me, is because the jar is exerting force against the water counter to gravity. The Earth's in free fall, but the Earth also produces gravity. It's pulling everything smaller than it in. It pulls at the water, but when the water hits a surface, that surface is providing enough force to stop the flow of water towards the center of gravity. Like this paint these guys splash against the outer walls or the balls that float around until the plane levels out and they roll around on the floor. The jar is preventing the water from being in free fall towards the Earth, so it can now layer. The reason you can't see it is because you can't seemingly grasp the concept of relative motion in 3 dimensions.
Because the Earth is said to be falling at a rate of acceleration greater than that of gravity.
No. Gravity is relative to the mass creating it. The acceleration towards the Sun is greater than the acceleration towards the Earth because the Sun has more mass and has a stronger pull. I know this is a continuation of your conclusion I just debunked, but you just claimed the pull of gravity from the Sun is somehow the same as the pull of gravity from the Earth, and it's not. It seems like your entire video is predicated on the fact that you just don't understand just what gravity is.
Gravity, you fucking retard! Gravity! Have you ever heard of fucking gravity? Gravity! Gravity!
Oh, Desert File, you are a treasure. But what makes this worse, absolutely worse, is you've pushed forward with this video and your previous video trying to make a case for density and ignored the fact that your own evidence disproves your model. If there was no gravity and just relative density, that free fall plane experiment shouldn't happen. That music video I showed you couldn't happen. The densities of materials wouldn't change based on their relative motion. Had you stopped to think clearly about your own evidence, you'd realize you were just plain wrong. But because you're not critically examining your own claims, you can't even see it. This here is a sealed container. The liquids have been poured in, settled into layers, and the container sealed. If the layering is caused by relative density and no other force, and the sealed container guarantees the substances couldn't change density by adding or removing, say, some of the air, then the result you see here is not caused by density alone. If it were, the layering would remain regardless of freefall. In fact, you shouldn't be able to have people bouncing about the cabin like they do because the density in the cabin hasn't changed. If the only force working on matter is density, then this experiment you showed here shouldn't happen. Period. The only reason this should happen, and you accept this video as real because you're using it as evidence, is as if there were some other force acting on these fluids besides relative density. Your own evidence refutes your model, Nick. I wish you could see that and stop sucking on the flat earth kool-aid.
Oh yeah!
That's it for me. If you enjoyed this video, remember to mash that like and subscribe button, and remember to check out my Debunking the Flat Earth playlist for more Flat Earth crazies. If you want to keep up to date on when I post videos, feel free to follow me on Facebook and Twitter, link in the description. And as always, I will see you next time.